Coming up on the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast, one of the leading researchers in cardiac sarcoidosis joins me to share some of his findings.
I have to tell you, one of the most maddening things as a doc and even for our patients is that, again, a lot of times you just don't know if people have cardiac sarcoidosis.
Dr. Ravi Karra of Duke University talks about his latest research on how sarcoidosis affects the heart.
And so we think sarcoidosis starts with a genetic susceptibility, meaning that there's something in your genes or your DNA that makes you sensitive to it, but it doesn't really happen until you encounter some sort of environmental trigger that sort of sets off the process.
It's all coming up on the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast.
This is the Sarc Fighter Podcast, living with sarcoidosis and other rare diseases. Here's your host, John Carlin.
Hello and welcome. This is episode 134 of the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast. I'm your host, John Carlin. The date of this recording is March 16th, 2025. Of course, I do this podcast because I want to help you see some hope at the end of the sarcoidosis tunnel. I do it to give us all a sense of community and to let one another know that there are others out there. We are all suffering the effects and we all want answers. And in many cases, believe it or not, we are finding ways at least to keep sarcoidosis at bay. And today we're going to hear more about the research that's being done at Duke University, where they are good at way more than basketball. So, of course, that's what everybody thinks of when they think of Duke, right? The basketball team, because they're always amazing. In fact, as I say this, I think they're still ranked number one in the country. But Dr. Ravi Karra has just received funding from the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research to study sarcoidosis in the heart. And he wants to know what causes it, how we can spot it more quickly, and it's just fascinating to hear what he is learning, and we're hoping that they can flesh it all out, as they say, as they put their theories to the test, right? But before we get to all of that, I just got to share a little bit of personal stuff. I just got back from a 4-day weekend in New York City, and typically people who know me know that I'm not really a city person per se. I mean, as much fun as we had, if you gave me a choice between that or fly fishing in Montana, I would go to Montana. Of course, that pretty much would be my choice versus anything. So maybe it's not a fair comparison, but we had a great time in New York City. It was a total tourist weekend. I was there with my wonderful wife, Mary, and 2 of my 3 sons and their wives. I saw Wicked for the first time on Broadway. We had great seats, and it was just amazing. It gave me chills at some points. And I've got to tell you that I had not seen the movie or heard any of the details of the story. So my wife had gone and seen Wicked years ago, and she came back raving about it. And I said, well, don't tell me, because she wanted to go back and see it again. And I said, I'll go to New York with you sometime and we'll see it. But don't tell me the story because I don't want any spoilers. So then, of course, the movie comes out and everybody's talking about it and it's winning all these awards. And anytime anybody said anything about Wicked, I put my fingers in my ears so I wouldn't know the story, right? Because I wanted to see it for the first time. And that actually worked out. And it literally did. I mean, the music was amazing. The production was amazing. And the story is amazing. It gave me chills. And it was just wonderful. So it was great to take that all in, and I really did feel like I was the last person on earth who didn't know the whole story behind Wicked or anything about it. And I thought that it might be, I don't know, because I this is little known truth about me, but my senior year in high school, the school production was The Wizard of Oz, and I played the Scarecrow, right? And so I thought, well, I have this kind of special connection to The Wizard of Oz because I played the Scarecrow in the senior production at school. And there's not a whole lot about the actual Wizard of Oz. I mean, you know what's going on, but I'm not going to say any more just because I don't want to give anybody else a spoiler in case I wasn't the last person on Earth. But at any rate, it was really fantastic. The other thing I did in New York, which some people may find curious that it would be such a big deal, is Mary and I were able to go to a Peloton class live. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, a Peloton is an exercise bike that you get in your home, and it's like something you would have at a gym, and it's got a screen on it, and you sign in and you pay a monthly membership, and then you take classes with these instructors, and there's a relatively small group of instructors. I want to say less than 20. And there's probably only 4 or 5 that I typically go to. So I sit down on the bike, I'm saying, all right, I want a 30-minute class, and I hit this, and there's Dennis Morton is one of them. And I take a class with Dennis Morton. Well, the people on Peloton in those studios in New York are reaching millions of people because of the way that they do this. So they've become celebrities. And it's a big deal to get in there. I think there's like 30 to 40 bikes in this special workout studio in New York City at Peloton headquarters. And it's really, really hard to get onto one of those bikes because there's so much interest in it. So we, as soon as we knew we were going to New York, we went online, we tried to sign up, and we got put on the waiting list. But then as people dropped off, we kept moving up, and voila, we got into 2 different classes, one on Friday and one on Saturday. So you go in, and they've really done this right. Of course, it's New York City, but so you Uber to the studios, and you walk in, and it's like being in a really advanced gym, but then all of a sudden there's these huge screens playing, and all these famous instructors you see up there on the screen doing their thing. And yeah, it's really, really cool. And of course, they've got a merch shop, and I'm a sucker for merch. So, I bought a sweatshirt, and I bought some socks and a mug that says Peloton Studios New York, and Mary bought some stuff, and I actually bought a true workout technical t-shirt that you wear that's, wicks the sweat and does all of that. But we got to do 2 rides, and there are cameras panning the studio, usually on the instructor, but then you can see 5 or 6 other people off to the side of the instructor, and Mary and I were among those people. And you can't tell who we are unless you know, but it's still cool. And I say this as a guy who does the evening news every night on television. It's like, wow, look at that. You can see us on camera. We're so geeking out, right? So it was really fun to just be in the background, to take the classes live, and to do that. And that was something that Mary had always wanted to do, and I'm so glad that we were able to make that happen. And then not once but twice in the same weekend. But after the first one, I have to tell you, it was cold in New York. The wind was howling. The temperature was probably in the 30s, even in the middle of the day. It could have been 40, but it didn't matter because the wind was just whipping around those buildings. And one of the things that I have found difficult, as you have heard, because of sarcoidosis, is running or like, I like to hike. I like the idea of hiking, but my legs just don't work the way they used to. But if you just see me walking around, you don't know. And Mary's like, well, we can walk back to our hotel. It's only, let's see, 18 blocks. And I'm like, no, I don't want to walk back to the hotel. She's like, come on, you can do it. And the wind was in our face. I've got this full bag of clothing that we had just bought at Peloton, and the wind is literally, I've got my hand by my side, and the wind is whipping till the bag is just about straight out behind me, and you're leaning into the wind. And it was cold. I had on a winter jacket, had the hood pulled up. I was pretty miserable, and I probably also complained more than I should have. But we stopped about 3 or 4 blocks from the hotel, and we had a nice lunch at a New York, kind of a famous New York little chain called Junior's. And it was good, but it was just nice to get out of the wind and the cold. And then from there, the remaining 4 blocks of the hotel was no big deal. But it was great. We did a walking food tour in Greenwich Village, which was so interesting. Man, they talk about the prices of these houses in Greenwich Village. It's, they start at $5 million and there's just nothing to them. It's just a small little apartment, but that's, whatever. That's what it is, and that's life there. And you realize that every single person that you see that is a local resident walking their dog is a gazillionaire if they live there, right? I doubt they get in a taxi with their dog just to walk around Greenwich Village. They live there, and if they live there, they're living in these $5 million apartments or homes or. Yeah, anyway, it just blows my mind as a cul-de-sac resident in Virginia, outside a small city in Virginia. We also went to a breakfast place called Balthazar. I think I'm saying that right, Balthazar. Again, my daughter-in-law, Beth, is just really good at finding, she goes on Instagram, she finds all these places that are the best of the best. And sure enough, we get there. We've got 9 o'clock a.m. reservations for breakfast, and there's already a line out the door at 8:30 when we get there, people wanting to get in. And oh my God, but that breakfast blew my mind. It was unlike anything else I've ever had. They're famous for their French fries, among many other things. And somebody said that they actually fry them in duck fat. Could that be a thing? But they kind of look like McDonald's French fries, but they don't taste like any French fries I've ever had. And a lot of people were having them served, instead of home fries, you get French fries with your breakfast. And I had a corned beef hash, which was fresh made hash with a couple of fried eggs on top. Oh, it was to die for. Anyway. And then we did we went to a fancy bagel place called Liberty Bagels, supposedly the best bagels in New York. They've got all the awards hanging on the walls, and they have something called the Rainbow Bagel, which is their signature bagel. I had one, it was like a bacon, egg, and cheese breakfast sandwich. Amazing. And people talked about New York bagels and how they're different than the rest of the bagels in the world. And apparently it has something to do with the mineral content in the water in New York City. And so there are a couple of places that have moved outside New York City. They want to make New York-style bagels, and so they have drums of water shipped to their businesses so that they can make bagels with New York water. Apparently that's the only way you can do it. And I do have to tell you that they are different than any other bagels anywhere. And they are as advertised. It's really amazing. So we did that. We went to Liberty Bagel. We went to an off-Broadway show, something about Friends, the musical, which was fantastic. Just in a little theater. There was only right in front of the stage. It only went 5 rows deep, so a very small theater. And we were in the 4th row. And the cast was great. The music was great. And it was literally right across the street from the theater that has Wicked. So it's off Broadway, but it's in the same district. It's just a very small theater, and everybody, all the cast was wonderful. And then you come back from New York after cocktails and rooftop bars and all of that. And yesterday I was in the backyard fighting with my temperamental chainsaw, cutting up a tree that had fallen on my fence back in the fall, and so I had done my best to patch the fence so the dogs wouldn't get out of the backyard, and just kind of left it there since the fall. And one of the things, I don't know if I talked about this or not, but I got attacked by yellow jackets right after the tree fell down. I go walking back through, we have just a small patch of woods on our lot, and I go walking back to look at the tree, and the next thing I know, I've got like 8 or 9 yellow jacket stings, and I'm running away from them, and they're just tearing me up. Then I was wearing a pair of Crocs with no socks on, so they got my feet, they got my arms. I was carrying a cup of coffee. I looked in there was 3 dead ones in the coffee. Thank God. You got what you deserved, you nasty yellow jackets. And I did have a pest guy come. He found the holes in the backyard, but he wasn't sure he got them all. And there's a lot of leaves back there. It's just really hard to tell. So I was waiting for cold weather, and then it got super cold. We had a very cold, nasty winter here with ice and snow, which we don't usually have, on the ground for a couple of months. And all of a sudden, the snow is gone, and the weather's getting warmer, and I don't know if there's still yellow jackets back there or not. So time to go out and face the chainsaw, which I don't use very often, and it when it runs good, but you got to pull it a lot of times to get it started. But anyway, I did all that. I cut up the big tree, which I'm very proud of myself for. It was a big tree. If it had been any bigger, my Lowe's style chainsaw probably wouldn't have been big enough to handle it, but this was right on the edge of my and the chainsaw's ability, and we got it done, and now I have a nice stack of wood in the backyard. So I go from the Peloton and Wicked in New York City, being very cultural, to being a lumberjack in my backyard here in Virginia. But if you had told me in 2019, when I was in the worst throes of my sarcoidosis treatment, and I couldn't even do 2 passes with my lawnmower before I had to bend over and catch my breath, that I would be doing all this stuff, I would have said no way. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. And now I do want to admit that when I finished the tree work yesterday, I was exhausted. And I had to come in and just sit on the couch for a little bit. It was all I had to do when I was picking up the tools and walking back to the garage. That felt difficult. I mean, didn't feel impossible, but I knew, I am done. I am done. There is nothing left in me. But it was good. It's a great sense of satisfaction. And even as I look out the window from my home office now, I can see the stack of wood out there, and it makes me feel good that I got that done. All right, enough about that. Up next, my conversation with Dr. Karra from Duke University.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the Sarc Fighter Podcast. You may be wondering, what can I do to help? How can I be a part of the sarcoidosis solution? It's simple. Make a donation to KISS, Kick In to Stop Sarcoidosis. 100% of the money goes to the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. Look for a link in the show notes of the Sarc Fighter Podcast. Welcome back to the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast. Joining me now is Dr. Ravi Karra from Duke University. Dr. Karra, thank you for joining me this morning.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So right off the bat, why don't you just kind of set the table for our listeners here and tell them what areas that you are researching with respect to sarcoidosis and where you land in the whole sarcoidosis atmosphere, so to speak.
Yeah, thanks, John. So I direct our program here at Duke in cardiac sarcoidosis, and that's part of a larger multidisciplinary sarcoid program here. And so I really focus on patients that have involvement in the heart, and we're really interested in trying to help patients do better with this. A lot of times, for us with cardiac sarcoidosis, sometimes it's not easy to make a true diagnosis, and so we try to help patients navigate that. Navigate the ups and downs of remission, relapse, and then if things aren't working right, help them find the right treatment to overcome their disease.
Yeah, and so when you look at cardiac sarcoidosis from your perspective, is there any particular aspect of cardiac sarc that you're working on or that you're looking into?
Yeah, our program's been kind of up in earnest for about 3 or 4 years now, and I have to tell you, one of the most maddening things as a doc and even for our patients is that, again, a lot of times you just don't know if people have cardiac sarcoidosis. Cardiac sarcoidosis, unlike other areas like the lung or maybe even the skin, where you can do biopsies and see if it's there. It's kind of hard to do a biopsy for the heart. Not technically, but just because the disease is so patchy, so you tend to swing and miss a lot. And so you can imagine if you're taking a little piece of the heart, and that's not without risk. And so a lot of times it's just not favorable to the patient because the test just may miss and it doesn't really tell you anything if you have a negative biopsy for the heart. And so a lot of times that means that we kind of make these educated guesses. And in fact, the guidelines for like the American Heart Association on sarcoidosis really kind of group sarcoidosis, the diagnosis of cardiac sarc, in terms of you might have it or you could have it, and it's just sort of these soft terms. And so for a patient, that's hard because we're prescribing some pretty big medicines to try to shut down the immune system so that you don't have progression of sarcoidosis. And so for us, the big unmet need in cardiac sarcoidosis is better diagnostics, and we're doing a couple of research projects around that.
Yeah. So if there's one recurring theme that I have when I talk to patients on the podcast and in my own life, it's that sarcoidosis is maddeningly difficult to diagnose, and it's usually not the first thing and why would it be that doctors go looking for? Because it's an orphan disease, right? It's kind of down the list. It's like, well, we look for this, we look for this, we look for, could it be sarcoidosis? Is that kind of how it goes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, cardiac sarc is particularly maddening. So we know that cardiac sarc is a big driver of why people don't do well with sarcoidosis. It's clinically meaningful in about 5% of all patients with sarcoidosis. But then when you look at the people who have cardiac sarc, about a quarter of them have only involvement of the heart. And that makes it even harder to figure out. So you can imagine there's a lot of overlap with all sorts of other things. And so in our clinic, we tend to see a lot of people pretty far down along the journey, meaning that, this is, do they have it or do they not have it? That's a question we commonly get. But yeah, this is a big problem for cardiac sarc.
So how do you get from, gee, here's a person who has a heart problem to it's likely or definitely cardiac sarcoidosis?
Yeah, so a couple ways. So we kind of have a little bit of a diagnostic algorithm, and it's very much in line with the approach that's recommended by the American Heart Association. In that, the first thing we do is we typically can get an MRI if the patient's able to get one. And if you've got damage to the heart, if you've got scarring in a certain place, that's pretty good to say, at least it's a possible thing. But if it's negative, that really means that the chance of having meaningful cardiac sarc for the next 10 years or so is pretty low. And so that's a really good test up front. And so we look for the pattern of where it's involved in the heart, based on autopsy studies and things like that. We know that it involves the back of the heart. And so if it shows up in the right spot, then we say, maybe this could be it. And then to go along with that is going to be a clinical syndrome. So patients with sarcoidosis, especially the heart, they tend to have a lot of rhythm problems. And so if people have a history of rhythm problems, that ups the ante. If it's all over the heart, then that means that the heart can get weak. And so I actually am an advanced heart failure doctor. So this is part of why I see a lot of patients with sarcoidosis is that the heart muscle can get weak. And so if you put those things together and you really don't have any other cause, so you rule out things like genetic stuff, then you really up the ante. But really, the definitive way is to have some degree of tissue saying, look, here's a granuloma that really tells us that there's sarcoidosis somewhere in the body or ideally in the heart.
Yeah, if you find that granuloma, then it wasn't a swing and a miss, then you nailed it. But you take a sample from another healthy part of the heart, and gee, there's no granuloma there. Maybe it's not sarcoidosis. So that's got to be maddening. You're right.
It is really frustrating, and I think that it takes a lot. I mean, we have really really remarkable patients that are very willing to understand the uncertainty here, right? I mean, imagine having that conversation. Look, I don't know what you've got. I think we need to take a piece of the heart, but gosh, if the test doesn't tell me anything, I didn't get anywhere. We didn't move the needle. And we have a lot of really great patients that are willing to do that just to get an answer.
So you mentioned that you are looking at your research is looking at a couple of different aspects. What would those two be?
Yeah, we've taken two approaches to try to see if we can solve this problem of diagnostics. The first one, and both are funded by really patient-centered sarcoidosis foundation. So the first one is funded by the Ann Theodore Foundation, and so we think sarcoidosis starts with a genetic susceptibility, meaning that there's something in your genes or your DNA that makes you sensitive to it, but it doesn't really happen until you encounter some sort of environmental trigger that sort of sets off the process. And why that's important is that a long time ago there was a doc named Kvine, and he figured out that if you took extracts of spleen and you would actually inject it under the skin, and that only in patients with the spleen had to be from someone for sarcoidosis, that sarcoid spleen would induce a granuloma only in people with sarcoidosis, and so kind of a weird test. It's not really there are some limits to it in terms of how many of that type of sample can you get, but it was really important for the biology. And the reason is that it sort of means that if people are primed for this, there are certain people that are just primed for developing sarcoidosis. And so we've taken that to mean that there's probably a circulating blood cell that might sort of seed the tissues. And so you might imagine if a susceptible patient gets exposed to something, then that blood cell will expand and cause granulomas. And so we've been trying to search that. And so with the Ann Theodore Foundation, we've done kind of profiling of our patients with sarcoidosis, and we think we're trying to find that cell type that causes sarcoidosis. And so that's one way. So if you can measure that cell and find it, that might be a non-invasive way to say, hey, at least this is someone that I think could get the disease. The second approach that we're doing is trying to repurpose some imaging agents. A lot of kind of like when we talked about diagnosing cardiac sarcoidosis, taking pictures of the heart are a really, really big deal in how we make the diagnosis. But the picture modalities we use, which are cardiac MRI, we're just looking for scar. Lots of things cause scar. And then with PET scanning, lots of things cause inflammation of the heart. So neither are really specific. It's sort of the patterns that sort of make you think about sarcoidosis. So we're interested in sort of getting closer to the biology and taking pictures of the biology of sarcoidosis. So another project that we have going through FSR, which has been really fun to get off the ground, is repurposing an agent that allows us, an imaging agent that allows us to look at macrophages. And so macrophages are the key cell type that form these granulomas. And so we're trying to see if we can take this FDA-approved imaging agent and kind of reconfigure it a little bit and see if we can actually see granulomas in patients that have that we know to have sarcoidosis, but we can do it non-invasively.
So an imaging agent, when I get an MRI, I get it with and without some sort of a dye, right? Because they're for my neurosarc. You're trying to develop a different version of that for cardiac?
Yeah, so it was pretty broad. So it just really would label macrophages. And so this is the imaging agents under the trade name Lymphoseek right now. And how it's used in the clinic right now is that if a patient has cancer and you're trying to map their lymph nodes, the surgeon will often inject Lymphoseek at the time of the surgery and say, where are my lymph nodes? And so in this instance, what we're trying to do is give that agent by vein and then take a picture all the way through and say, does this agent light up where the granulomas are? And so that we think will add some specificity to some of the other modalities. The cool part about this is that if anyone that's done a PET scan, it's not fun. I mean, for a cardiac PET, I mean, you have to go through this kind of terrible diet the day before, and as a result, if there can be a lot of false positives and false negatives with it, just based on how the dietary prep is, that's not fun at all. And so something like this wouldn't require a dietary prep, and so it might make it a little bit easier to make that diagnosis.
So where are you with respect to your research? You know, you jump in the river and you start down the river and you kind of know what you know, but you don't know what you don't know. And then once you figure out what you don't know, how do you fix it? Where are you in that whole trajectory?
Yeah. So for the first project where we're trying to find the cell type, we think we have one, and so now we're testing the hypothesis, working with other groups across the country to try to say, hey, can we measure this cell type in people? Is it real? And so that's sort of TBD. For us, it's the other exciting part about it is because of the way we identified the cell type, we can actually find kind of the mechanisms and the molecules and kind of learn a little bit about how this actually happens. And so that could even lend us to get us into therapeutics and things like that. So that's a big open-ended process, and we're still on the early phases of making sure we found the right cell type. The second project with lymphoseq and kind of repurposing it, that's a little bit further along. That molecule has already been developed, the technology's there. Now we're just kind of working through the regulatory hurdles to be able to use this for a different indication than what it's currently approved for.
And you got to prove the efficacy and the safety of it and that sort of thing, I would think.
Yeah. Luckily, this was tried before for arthritis in the past, and it lights up joints pretty well for arthritis. But it hadn't, they weren't able to, the company was able to move that and tie it to a therapeutic. Ours is the purely diagnostic question here because I think that's really important for patients, especially with cardiac sarc. And so we're just trying to, so there's good safety data on it. And so we think it's going to be safe, but we have to make sure that we're monitoring for that because at the end of the day, we want to do something that's helpful, not harmful.
For sure. So you're at Duke in North Carolina. They're in the Research Triangle, as it were. It's a pretty big population center. How many Sarc patients come through your clinic?
Yeah, so it's estimated in the Duke system when we do it, we have something like several thousand patients in the Duke system. I personally follow about 200 patients with cardiac sarc, so one of the larger groups in the country. We have a multidisciplinary program here, so I focus on the heart, but we also have lung doctors, we have eye doctors, we have skin doctors, we have liver, we have a kidney specialist, people that are interested in it. And why that's kind of fun is that with this network of people that are really interested, we can provide patients with a really kind of comprehensive evaluation. I mentioned that a quarter of patients with cardiac sarc have heart only, but that means 75% have not heart only. And so I think it's pretty important to engage other docs that with specialty. And so oftentimes the part the stuff that's the sickest will drive what needs to be treated. So sometimes if the heart's dormant, but if the lungs are active, the lung doctor will take the lead and things like that.
I'm curious because in fact I just got an email that I talked about on the last podcast, and this person will be a guest soon in the next couple of months. I got an email from New Zealand, a cardiac patient, and she's a trail runner, marathon runner. She competes in equestrian events. She's a police officer. She's a sniper. Super, super fit person. And I keep getting people who contact the show who were super fit or fitter than the average person who have cardiac sarcoidosis. Could the fitness effort be the trigger?
That's a great question. I don't think so. I don't think it's the fit that drives it. But it's pretty interesting. We do know that there's an environmental component, and so you might recall there's some really nice literature that 9/11 workers, as they were working through that tragedy, there's this really high instance of sarcoidosis in that group of rescue workers, and so there's just clearly some environmental component, particularly here on the East Coast. We tend to see a lot of young Black women that have it, and that's a really big part of our practice that we end up seeing. And so I think it maybe if you had to put it together, it would be the environmental piece. And then the other part is that a lot of our patients, we really focus on agency and helping patients like kind of trying to take control. Again, it's this maddening thing. And sometimes one of the hardest pieces is to not have control. And so, a lot of shared decision making happens in our practice to help patients really get of control. But along with that, you might imagine if someone's really active and really fit, they're probably not super passive, and so they're probably looking for answers. And so that might be another reason why it might feel like there are more people with sarcoid in that population.
So it's a causation correlation kind of situation.
Exactly.
Yeah. So do you think that there's going to be an answer here? I mean, when we talk about diagnosis and maybe I'm sorry, what is the dye that you want? Either
Yeah, we're using it's called tilmanocept. It's a
okay.
trade name Lymphoseek.
Okay, so how much promise do you think there is here? Just FSR wouldn't have funded this unless they thought you were onto something.
Yeah, I mean, in preclinical data, we see some interesting things. So in preclinical data, we can take the imaging agent and put it on tissues with sarcoidosis, and it lights up the granuloma. So that's pretty good. So that's it's a tissue, it's a static thing on a microscope slide. That's different than a person. But if anything's got a good chance to work, this is a reasonable bet.
And now you talk about an affliction in the heart. I've heard people say that they had granulomas, say, on a heart valve, and it was sort of a mechanical function. And then there's another type, and forgive me for using all these layman's terms, but at least most of the listeners will understand. But there's also there's sarcoidosis that can affect electromagnetic messaging within the heart, which causes the arrhythmias and that kind of stuff. Is that typically what we're talking about here?
Yeah. So we when we look at our population, most people come in with heart rhythm problems, and
Okay.
so the heart's it's a fantastic organ. It's got muscle properties. It's supposed to, it fills up with blood and squeezes it out so that if you're running a marathon, it can keep up with you and give you the juice that you need to keep going. But what regulates that's the wiring in the heart. The wiring in the heart tells it when to beat and how to beat and how hard to beat, things like that. And so you can imagine if sarcoid kind of gets into the heart tissue, if it gets into the muscle, then it can make the muscle weak. But if it gets into the wiring, that's where you have problems with heart rhythm issues. And so a lot of times when it gets into the wiring, patients will have heart block. And that's very, very common for patients to present with a left heart block. And so that means that they would eventually need a pacemaker to treat that. And then some of the more scary things are if it gets into the wiring of the heart in the bottom chamber of the heart, then you can have these abnormal heart rhythms, and those can lead to some really, really dangerous rhythms that sometimes some of our patients end up with defibrillators for.
Yeah. So yeah, I was going to say, so when do you go with a pacemaker and when do you go with a defibrillator?
Yeah. So they're pretty similar devices in a lot of ways. So all defibrillators will have pacemaker function in them.
Okay.
But the defibrillator has the ability to always just watch for these abnormal fast heart rhythms that could be potentially lethal. And so if it ever sees one, then it would deliver a shock and it saves lives in that case. So pacemakers usually for when people's heart rate's too slow. And so if that granuloma gets into the wiring so that the top chamber, the bottom chambers of the heart, the atria and the ventricles aren't talking to each other anymore, that's when a pacemaker is used to help kind of recouple those things and keep the heart beating at a proper level.
Yeah. The people that I've talked to that had the defibrillator say when it goes off, it's not a pleasant experience.
Yeah, it certainly is not. And, our goal when putting it in is for safety. We want to be able to, if someone would ever have a bad problem, we want to be able to, save life. But a lot of what we do is to prevent that from happening. And so we use various drugs and we even do procedures to try to minimize that from those ventricular arrhythmias from happening.
Yeah. When you go after sarcoidosis, cardiac sarcoidosis right now with various therapies, is prednisone still the first line of defense?
Yeah, prednisone, it's tried and true. It's a hammer. Sarcoid is an autoimmune disease, and so we know it's your immune system attacking your own body. And And so we knock it down. And prednisone is the absolute hammer. It's been the hammer for decades for it. And it's not particularly it's not a great drug. I mean, it's got a lot of side effects and it can be really hard to take. And if someone's taking high dose prednisone, getting a good night's sleep is not an easy thing to do at all. And but it's really the first line agent. In our practice, we try to get people off of prednisone as much as we can, and try to wean them onto something that we call steroid sparing reagents. And really, different practices across the country are going to use different agents. That's still kind of up in the air. What's the best one? So that's an area of probably an area of research that could be undertaken. But prednisone's a hammer and it works.
Yeah. So then after that, as you're trying to taper somebody, what's your next line of defense?
Yeah, at Duke, we typically use methotrexate, and that just tends to be out of our practice. Other centers will use Cellcept or something like mycophenolate mofetil, stuff like that. And we don't really know which one's better. Other places will use Imuran. But we try to get people off of prednisone onto one of those other agents just to kind of minimize the long-term effects of prednisone.
Mm-hmm. You didn't say Remicade.
We use Remicade quite a bit too. And so we'll try those first couple of agents first. And we typically will do that just because they're accessible, they're oral, or can be done at home. But if people aren't getting better, if we still see evidence of inflammation despite being on those medicines, then that's when we'll start reaching for Remicade. The other time we'll use Remicade or a TNF agent like that is if a patient's really sick. And so, for example, I mentioned I'm an advanced heart failure doctor, so I see a lot of people whose hearts are failing. If we don't really think we're going to have a lot of time to really sort this out, but we just need to know if treating the Sarc will help the heart get better, then we'll just throw the kitchen sink at them up front, just to buy us some time to figure it out, and then start to walk it back if people are getting better. But you can imagine if a patient's really, really ill and they're having bad heart failure, and you've thrown the kitchen sink and they're not getting better, then immune suppression isn't good enough, and then we start thinking about stuff like heart transplants and things like that.
Wow. Yeah. You think there are a lot of people walking around right now today who have cardiac sarc, and they know there's something wrong with them, but nobody has any idea that's what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. Our practice is really, we tend to see a lot of people at the end of the journey, meaning that they've had problems for many, many years, and it's just been hard to figure out what's been driving it. And then ultimately someone says, what about cardiac sarc? And then they end up in our population. And so just hearing that story time and again in the office, I think there's definitely an opportunity to find people earlier on, and hopefully if we can make it a little bit easier to detect it and to diagnose it, that will improve the ability to find those individuals.
Yeah. So your practice there at Duke, you're heading this up. Do you have a lot of med students who are working on this? How big is your group that's trying to solve this problem?
Yeah, we have a fairly large group. So at Duke, we have a very unique medical school here. It's a really great school that attracts really, terrific students. And so we've been really lucky to be in this really high talent pool here. And so we get third-year medical students. So we have a couple third-year medical students with us now that are doing this. So they do a dedicated year of research on sarcoidosis. And then we also have, and then I have a laboratory that runs this. And so I have like grad students and postdocs that have been working on sarcoidosis. And so altogether, we probably have a group of, I'd say 6 to 8 people in our group immediately working on this. And that's not to mention all the clinical research coordinators, all the people on the regulatory side that help us to make sure that we're doing the research properly.
And is one of the requirements that you're a good basketball player? Because you're at Duke.
It's funny. This is the year to really shout out with that. But yeah, the basketball team is pretty remarkable here. And I should say we do have some connection to the basketball team.
Do you?
Yeah, one of our patients who shared a story on the Duke website is strongly connected to the basketball team. And so they've been incredibly supportive of our program. So we are definitely all Duke basketball.
All right. Well, yeah, go Blue Devils. Go Blue Devils. I follow ACC sports because I'm up here in Virginia Tech country. So
Gotcha.
You guys are significantly better at basketball than us,
Yeah, this has
than
been a fun
everybody
year.
else. Yeah, yeah. I have a feeling this could be another championship season for the Blue Devils,
We
but
hope so. We hope so for sure.
yeah. Sorry, I digress. Um, but look, this is really interesting. How valuable is the contribution to the greater good? Not just I know there's a monetary contribution, but when you look at organizations like FSR and the advocacy and that sort of thing, how important is that to the overall greater good when you're fighting something like sarcoidosis?
Yeah, it's so important. It's essential. I mean, I would say required. Yeah, it can't emphasize how important it is. I mean, when you study a disease like sarcoidosis, it's a rare disease, and so traditional funding bodies like aren't really gonna they're not gonna give a lot of grants to be able to study this. And so I just gave you two examples where we've had the Ann Theodore Foundation and the Foundation for Sarcoid, the FSR. And both of them have been just great in really getting. My lab had been studying something else and really given us the chance to take some of that technology and move it into studying apply it towards sarcoidosis. And those types of leaps take money and they take effort and they take time. And so really foundations are the key in making that happen. And so it's not only until you're really late that you can be really in a rare disease that you can become competitive for some of those other funding sources. So these are really these small Kickstarter grants are just so vital to really promoting research and interest and a vibrant community that's really looking to make things better for patients. The other part about that is that what's neat about it is that these foundations are often patient driven. And so when they're patient driven, it's nice for, I mean, as a doc, I see this a lot with my own clinic, but you can imagine that the research community is pretty broad. And so it's always really important to make sure that that the questions we're asking are important to patients. And I think that having this talk between patients and researchers is just so important to make sure that's always happening.
Yeah. So you spend some of your time in the lab, some of your time in the clinic. So you're seeing patients, but you're also working on the research as well.
Exactly right.
Yeah. So when do you think you might have a finding with your project?
Well, as a cardiologist, the answer was I wish it was done yesterday.
Right.
Our that's kind of our stereotype. But look, we're moving along. We're hoping to have some data back in the next year or so to really know whether or not we have this kind of the things we're doing has some legs to move forward.
Great. So the grant from FSR is that a 12-month grant?
It's a 2-year grant.
2 years. I couldn't remember. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right. So we got at least a couple. So you're very early on in that 2-year cycle.
Yeah, we were just awarded it, so that's why we're still in the regulatory phase. But we have a lot of really remarkable patients that have already expressed interest in wanting to contribute, and so that makes it a lot easier to do. A lot of times, the bottlenecks in these types of studies is finding the right patient to do it, and I don't really see that to be a problem. We've got a really terrific group of patients that just want to make it better they want to learn and they want to add and they want to make things better for other patients.
So a patient who would agree to do this, unlike a standard clinical trial where you might have might have to go off the drug that you're taking in order to try the new proposed drug. For you, they just kind of have to step up and say, use me as a guinea pig and see if this imaging data works. I mean, I'm oversimplifying.
Yeah, I mean right. That we're doing a diagnostic, and so we just we're not changing anyone's therapy at all, and
no placebos, none of that business.
Yeah, none of that stuff. Yeah, we just take people with sarcoid that we know have it, and just say, do we see it, and can we measure it, and that's about it.
Do you need people that are local to you, or are you looking for people across the country? How does that work?
Our grant is for a local grant, but we tend to see a lot of patients from a lot of places. We get referrals from, across the country or, all the way up the East Coast. And, it's funny you mentioned New Zealand. We actually had someone reach out to us from Australia. That was a little bit logistical. I get that one will work. But anyone that comes and that gets evaluated in our clinic, I mean, there are some inclusion criteria. We would, but we would, would potentially be eligible.
Right. Dr. Karra, is there anything else that you want to add at this point?
No, I just this is so great. I'm so glad that there's a voice to patients for patients with sarcoidosis, and I was just really happy to be a part of the community.
Great. Well, thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Well, thanks to Dr. Karra. My takeaway is this notion that some of us are genetically predisposed to get sarcoidosis. We're walking around and we've got that gene, or we've got something that triggers activity in our body, and it's just dormant until it's triggered by an environmental factor, and then boom. You heard him say a lot of, a high percentage of the firefighters who breathed in the dust after 9/11 got sarcoidosis, and we've talked all around that. At some point I want to do a podcast or two just on that, but the fact is that not all the firefighters did, just some of them. So some of them breathed in the dust and they were fine, and some of them breathed in the dust and they got sarcoidosis. So the fact that there is something that's dormant and then there's some sort of a trigger, probably environmental, it seems like a topic that's coming up over and over and over. And, it'll be interesting to see what researchers find out in the next, few years or so as some of this research hopefully bears some fruit. But thanks to Dr. Karra for all he's doing, for getting Duke involved in the sarcoidosis solution and care, and for his leading efforts with respect to cardiac sarcoidosis. It was truly an honor and a pleasure to have him on the show today. By the way, this is a good time to contact me. If you'd like to share your story on the podcast, please contact me by email at carlinagency@gmail.com. The official Sarc Fighter song is called Zombie by Mark Steyer and his band, the White Hot Lizards. Hear Mark's story, the story behind the lyrics, in episode 12. And we got an update from Mark back in episode 118. The FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast comes out every other Monday. As I'm speaking today, neither my trusty dog Dougal or my other trusty dog Shandy are in my office because they are downstairs with Mary in her office. Traitors. The backstory to the founding of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research is episode 11 with Andrea and Redding Wilson. Don't forget to follow me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, yes, on Peloton. Just search for Sarc Fighter if you have one of these machines at home. My cycling blog, Carlin the Cyclist, has a section called Cycling with Sarcoidosis. If you're new here and you just want to figure out what sarcoidosis is, try listening to episode 2 with Dr. Simon Hart, and you can hear my story in episode 1. Otherwise, just send me an email, let me know what you think of the show, or if you'd like to be on the show, just hit my email, carlinagency@gmail.com. It's in the show notes. Until next time, keep fighting.